And good morning, all. We want to welcome you this morning to the How to Buy a Business class. My name is Daniel McCoy. I'm a senior business consultant with the UGA SBDC at KSU. So my full acronym is an SBC at UGA SBDC at KSU. So, being a former banker, we love acronyms and practice those things. We're going to give everybody a few minutes to get in. Got a good crowd that has registered and actually paid money. So thank you so much for your support. We might be able to continue another month or so. Just sit back and relax. We'll be here for an hour and a half. I am joined this morning with Dave Chambliss and Leslie Cuban, and they will be presenting as well. So we're excited about this. It's a great time to buy a business. True interest rates are still high, but they have flattened. So we didn't see a increase in the last Fed meeting. Sort of expecting maybe fourth quarter by the end that we might even see a backing off a little bit. Fingers are crossed. When there's discussions of recession, that always prompts some action, especially with 2024 being an election year. So we will see what happens. But give everybody just a few more minutes. Looks like we're halfway through our participants coming in the door. So we'll try to kick off here about 10:03 or so. So I see someone has already hit the Q&A. Good morning to you as well. As you notice across the bottom or the top, whichever you prefer, you do have a place for question and answers. We will be saving some time at the end of the program for just that, for you to pose your questions to any of the panelists. And if we don't know it, if we can't make it something up that will suit your answer, we'll go out and find it for you. So just be aware of that. And if you have an issue or anything, there is a chat feature up there as well, or down there. So looks like we're about 3 people away from what has registered before. So we'll just give them just a couple more minutes and we will kick off. So good morning to those coming in the door. Again, this is How to Buy a Business. My name is Daniel McCoy. I'm senior business consultant here at the UGA SBDC at KSU. And we will get started here in just one more minute. And the magic clock says it is 10:03. So we're going to get started. We want to, again, welcome everyone. So your presenters this morning, I'll start with myself, my new photo. So we'll get copies of the slides. So you can, put this up on your wall somewhere if you would like, whatever you want to do with it. But each one of us has our bio, and this is what my bio is. Basically, I've been with SBDC as of September the 18th. I've been here 6 years now. Before that, I was in lending. I was a commercial lender for about 20 years. Before that, I was in retail. So I do have a sort of an extensive financial background. I hold an MBA in accounting from Benedictine University. I got a Bachelor of Science in Organizational Management from Covenant, and then a liberal arts degree from Reinhardt. So that's me and my education. Leslie Cuban, who will be joining us as well. She's, you'll see her bio, certified franchise executive. She's has been a franchise owner since 1996. So anything and everything franchise, please keep Leslie in mind. And then Dave Chambliss from Abrexis Business Services. He has been, he actually co-founded Abrexis back in 2003. It's been CFO with publicly traded companies. You see everything, very experienced in this world. So, if you're looking to buy or sell good sized business, then Dave's your guy. And we would like to thank both David and Brent and Leslie for being our sponsor this morning. So keeping our costs down as well. So thank you guys for stepping up and sponsoring the program today. So my portion, we're going to talk a little bit about the location and how to value, look at valuing the business that you might be interested in buying. Some of the preliminary due diligence involved, and then getting the deal done, and then we'll turn it over. Actually, we'll turn it to Dave next, and then he'll get into getting the deal done as well. And then Leslie will close out with buying the franchise. Then we will save time for Q&A. Okay. All right. So let's move into it. Let's talk about actually what do you want to look for when you're looking at buying a business. Okay. So one of the top things you want to look for is customer loyalty, customer retention. We had a client not too long ago that bought a hair salon and wanted to redecorate, and the stylist did not like the decorations that she put up. An argument ensued, and the stylist took her co-workers with her, along with 90% of the clients. So there was really no customer loyalty to the business. There was more to the stylist. So you have to be careful on things like that. But you don't want to buy, because basically at that point it's just a startup business. Right? You want to see a minimum profitability somewhere around 10%. You want to determine and watch for things like deal breakers. If someone tells you, well, we're actually doing a lot more business, we're just not recording all the sales, the cash sales don't go on the revenue sheets or something, that's a deal breaker, because if they're lying about their revenues, then they're probably lying about something else. So just be careful on that stuff. Fit, does this match your skills and your location? Is the location good? If you're in North Atlanta and you are looking at a business on the south side of Atlanta, is that location really suitable for you? Are you going to move over there, or how's that going to play? Does it fit your lifestyle? I've actually had people tell me that, hey, I'm ready to quit corporate and buy me a business so that I don't have to work as hard. Well, that's a wrong idea. When you are the owner, you are the owner. That's when literally the buck stops with you. Okay. So, it's hard to buy. One of the things that we talk about is you need to know the industry that you're looking at buying. If you're trying to buy into, say, buy a restaurant and you've never worked in a food service, I've told clients before, go ahead, spend 3 to 6 months in the restaurant, in the front lines or in the back or something. Go out there and work in it for 3 to 6 months and see if this is something that is really suitable for you, because it's not a 9 to 5, and it's not, it's not an easy gig. There's a lot of work to be done. So, and as owner, you have to know those things, because when you have situations where something occurs and you're going to have to come in and take care of business. All right. And so remember, it's hard to turn if you buy a turkey, it's hard to convert it to an eagle. Okay. So realize that if the business has been unsuccessful in the past, dig deep into why it's been unsuccessful. Right. So the things you want to watch for is owners not taking a salary, or owners not taking distribution. Why is the owner not, what's the owner living off of if he's not taking money from the business? So you want to also, is this a business that has viability going forward? Are you looking at getting into a CD-ROM business? Those are things that you have to consider. A few years ago, just a couple years ago, everybody was wanting to buy and start vape shops because that was the hot thing. Well, now today, a lot of those guys are trying to give them away just about. And finally, affordability. Is this something that will pay for itself, and you'll be able to actually make a living and be able to pay off whatever financing that is required to purchase this? So consider this, a business is really an investment. So there's people that put their monies in annuities, they put them in the stock market, in retirement vehicles, but a lot of what an entrepreneur is doing is he or she is putting their money in a business as an investment for future returns. Why do you buy a business? Is because you expect to grow that business so that either via the business itself paying you more money, or when you sell it, you make even more money. So a business is in actuality an investment. So there's some investors, especially as I mentioned in the vape shop, some of those guys wanted to get in and get out quickly. 2 to 3 years, grow the business up to a large amount, sell it, and move on. Typically, those type of investors aren't looking at running a business. They're more interested in just ownership and the ability to get out of it quickly. So they're almost an angel type investor or a silent investor. Those type of investors, they're not really going to be in your day-to-day operations. Okay. Also, keep in mind when you're valuing an investment, you look at what is the rate of return of the capitalization of return. In other words, if I'm looking at my stock portfolio and I've got a stock that's performing at 1% over the last 5 years versus another group of stocks that are performing 12% over the last 5 years, guess where I'm going to put most of my money? It's going to be in that higher producing set of stocks, and businesses the same way. So when you're looking at an investment, you realize that you want, back to the last slide, you want a business that is turning around 10% return on investment. Okay. Many small business owners become very attached to their business. Realize that, especially if they started the thing and they've grown it and they've grown. So quite often buying a business becomes an emotional affair for both the seller and the buyer. And realize that when you're dealing with a seller, that can often be, this is their baby, and you come in and say, well, this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong. You might set that seller off where they wouldn't sell to you if they had to. So just be aware of those factors as well. Okay, so how do you value an investment? Okay. So a basic business value is a capitalization rate times expected return. And what does all of that mean? Well, the capitalization rate is calculated by dividing the business's net operating income by the current market value. So it's it's sort of a ratio experiment that is done in a percentage basis, and is more of an estimate of an investor's potential return. Okay, so you want to remember to take out any debts that are staying with the business. A lot of businesses currently have idle loans that they took out. And those loans are at 3.25%, 3.5%, something like that for 30 years. You can't touch that when the going rate for an SBA loan currently is 10.5 to 11. So some buyers are opting to buy that debt from the seller at that lower interest rate. So, if you got a $350,000 idle loan with the business and they're wanting $500,000, then you offer them $250,000 or $150,000, and you're going to assume that $350,000 debt. So they're made whole at the $500,000. You also want to see, what are the cash equivalents going on right now? What are the ARs? What's going to happen with those? Are they going to go with stay with the business when you buy it, or are they going to go with the seller because he's the one that actually made that money and he's just waiting on the money to come in? Why is that important? Well, it comes down to the bottom line. So business money is not there until it's collected. So a cash equivalent and AR, it's important that you document those, because some bills, believe it or not, actually go unpaid. And also you want to look at what is that future growth look like currently. Okay. So you've got to do some industry research, and you've got to figure out what is the norm for this type of industry? All right. So more back to more on the capitalization rate, things you want to look at, how secure are the future returns? What's the likelihood that this business is going to continue? If you're getting into the CD-ROM business, not a good likelihood. And we've seen that. We've seen, we've seen a change over the last 5 to 10 years. Even, who would have thought that places like Blockbusters would no longer be in existence around here, or so many others that have gone the way of the Kmart and the Sears and all of the big chains. And even, even Jeff Bezos from Amazon said that if they do not continue to adapt on a daily basis, that they could be there as well, that they could soon, be history as well. So you've got AI coming in, you've got all these other things. So you've got to look at the stability of this business and the likelihood. Also, how successful will the transition from the current seller to you be? That's going to be key as well. And sometimes it's hard for that seller to give up the ownership. So, it can affect things. The NDAs are the non-compete agreements. Those things are very important. But, right now there's a lot of controversy around non-competes, and, especially in Georgia, it's not a great state for non-compete agreements, just so you know. So when you look at different businesses, each one has a cap rate, a different type of cap rate and a different function. Even internally in a industry scenario, one business type will have a different cap rate than another, even though they're in the same NAICS code or the same type of business. One rule of thumb to look out for, and we talk about rule of thumbs quite often, you will have a multiple based on that business type that will take things like, what's the annual revenues, what's the SDE, which is a seller discretionary earnings, okay? What's EBIT, what's EBITDA, what's, that's earnings before interest and taxes, and then earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. EBITDA is very popular with the investment and with capital markets and things like that. They look at the EBITDA a lot. Even the federal government, when they were doing some, the Fed last year, or the last year of the pandemic, was doing some things, and it was basing it off of 4 times the EBITDA was the loan amount. So those are things that you need to be aware of as well if you're looking at buying a business. If you own a business already, you definitely need to know what EBITDA and SDE and all those things are. Okay. So typically you will see a valuation would be somewhere 2 to 5 times EBITDA. Again, EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. So how you calculate that is you take the bottom line, net income, and then you would add back your interest, taxes, depreciation, and any amortization. And if you don't know what amortization is, that is depreciation without a solid asset. So things like goodwill and closing costs and those things, there's not a hard asset there, but you can amortize it out to get the deduction on it. Then the multiple will depend on the different levels of reoccurring sales, customer loyalty, things like that, year over year. Some of the things to remember when you're calculating EBITDA, make sure expenses include a reasonable salary for owners. Otherwise, EBITDA needs to be adjusted. Okay. I mentioned earlier, some owners don't do a reasonable salary. Maybe they take a distribution or something like that, but you want to include that when calculating EBITDA. More on valuing, when it comes down to the bottom line on this sale, is this going to be a stock purchase? Is it going to be an asset sale? Right. So if you're buying the corporation with all of its holdings and everything, then that's a stock purchase. If you're just buying the assets of the business and you don't want that LLC or you don't want that corporation, you're going to buy the business and put it under yours, then that's an asset sale. Okay. And that comes into play when you're looking at different ways to value the business. What does that purchase price include? I mentioned the ARs. Does that also include the APs, the accounts payables? Does it include all the assets? Does it include, has it got goodwill in it? Goodwill is being the intangibles of the business, the branding, the name, etc. Is there inventory involved? You know, how does that play into the cost of the business? Also, when you're looking at the valuations, there's a guide out there that even when I was a lender way back in the day, our underwriters used the business reference guide to come up with a ballpark figure of what that business should sell for. Obviously, you have professionals that do business evaluations and business appraisals. Just so you know, if there's going to be financing involved, that evaluation or that business appraisal that you are the seller order from a company that does commercial appraisals cannot be used in the financing. Okay, so the lender has to have a rotation of commercial appraisers under the FIRREA Act, and that appraisal must be ordered by the lender through a third party in order to be used in the financing of the business. So if your seller comes to you and says, look, I have an appraisal right here, it says this business is worth X amount of dollars, just realize that the bank's going to order another one anyway. Or if you decide, hey, I'm really interested in this, I want to order an appraisal on it, well, that's fine and good, but realize again, you're going to have to pay for it twice, because you're going to pay for that one, and then when it comes around to the time for the purchase, either you or the seller will have to pay for it in closing. So there is a book out there called the Business Reference Guide. Currently, it's $192. You can get an annual subscription of $275, or you can come by and check us out. We have a subscription already. What the subscription does, there's an online version as well. So we have the hard copy. We have a hard copy here, and we have the annual subscription as well. Or you can subscribe to it yourself. You know, so they're now in their 33rd edition. And this is something sort of what you will get for that. So when we look at ways to measure the return again, you consider those things I've mentioned already: profit, EBITDA, EBIT, EBITDA, and SDE, seller discretionary earnings. Remember, probably the most popular one right now is the SDE. It's moving away from EBITDA because it's sort of been overused. So when you're looking at seller's discretionary earnings, realize you're buying that seller's job. That's what you're doing, okay? It's probably, as I noted in the slide, this is the best measure for closely held companies if they don't have stock out there on the stock market, or they're not publicly traded or whatever. SDE is probably the number one way or the number one choice of calculating valuation. So this is directly from the Business Reference Guide. This is construction rules of thumb. So number one rule is annual sales plus the inventory, 20 to 30% of annual sales. And why is that? Because you have your the 20 to 30% rule is based on, a lot of that's based on reputation, etc. So SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, plus 1 to 2 times, or multiplied by 1 to 2 times, plus inventory. EBITDA, 1 to 3 times EBITDA, and then 3 times EBIT. Now, over on the other side of the page is, if you'll notice, they break it down on under $1 million and $1 million to $5 million. Okay, MVIC is the suggested sales price. So you take the market value, which is what MVIC is standing for, divided by net sales. The median value, which is in the middle, should come in about 0.38. So that top annual sales is a little higher because you're adding in inventory. Okay. So just some of those calculations. So we're going to break it down a little bit further. This is one, a tanning salon, and I happen to have 2 tanning salon clients right now. Rules of thumb is 50 to 60% of annual sales, 2 times EBIT, 2 times EBITDA, because you don't have a lot of depreciation and amortization in EBITDA or in tanning salons. 2 to 4 times the seller discretionary earnings. You have an annual growth future of 1.5% and annual growth past of 2.7. So what that means is it's a, the business trend is slowing down just a little bit from its past growth. So here's a calculation, okay? So we have a seller discretionary earnings calculation, owner salary with all of their different ways of getting money. They get $100,000 a year. They have what we call add backs, which are things that will not go forward with the business of about 20,000. So you're looking at a total SDE of 120. Splitting the difference between 2 and 4, we came up with a 3 multiple. So 120,000 times 3. So the valuation of that business is 360,000. Now, again, all of these things that you're looking at are straight off their financial report. However, quite often there are things that are not listed on the financial report. And, as a lender, my rule of thumb is if it's not on paper, it's not real. Okay. If it's not in writing, it's not real. So, I once had a client that showed revenues of $19,000 in his business. When I asked about him, he goes, I don't claim my cash sales as revenue. I use that to pay the bills. Well, number one, you're missing the tax expense or taking the expenses off on your taxes. But at the same time, you're under reporting your revenue, which is costing you when it comes to selling your business because, you are borrowing money because we can't borrow something that you're only showing that you're only making that low a figure on. We can't do a loan for you. Okay. So this is a 5-year, this is an actual client, 5 years of their P&L. And then this was prepared for them to sell their business. Okay. So a couple things you want to notice. Number one, there's a lot of sporadic movement in their gross profit. So year 1, 530, year 2, 879. I can see that. Year 3, a little bit higher. $1,000,004. Year 4, they dropped down to 744,000, and then back up to 1.2. So a lot of movement. Could have been pandemic. Who knows? Also, though, look at your cost of goods. Okay, so the gross profit minus cost of goods divided by the gross profit will get you your gross profit percentage. Okay, so by indications, your cost of goods is all over the board as well. So your gross profit ranges from 60% first year to 70% second year, which is good. You're increasing, but why? And then your operating expenses, those come out as expected. Now let's get down to the add backs and some of the things you noticed. A couple of years, the owner didn't even take any money out of the business, even though those were 2 of the very profitable years. Why didn't the owner take some type of compensation? Amortization stayed pretty much the same. Depreciation looks like you bought some equipment or something in year 2 and 3. Those are sizable add backs. Life insurance. Is the new owner going to have life insurance also? So that's an offset. Same thing with the payroll. The new owner will be taking a salary as well. The same thing with the auto expense. Even though, yes, you can add those back, but most lenders aren't going to touch it because The new owner is going to do the same thing. They're going to write off their auto expense as well. Okay. So do your due diligence, review those financial documents, test the go or no-go financial criteria. What's the gross profit and the net profits? What's going on with those? You want to evaluate what makes up that revenue, reoccurring revenue, etc. Evaluate sales trends, and then prepare a cash flow form with your SBDC. When it comes to financing, remember that you want to, there's buyer contributions, investor contributions, there's ROBs, rollover business starts, using your 401k money. And that's a whole different program. You can do bank financing, seller financing, and then the 3Fs, friends, families, and fools. And here's an illustration of one. Keep in mind, this is not a home mortgage. You want to get an attorney involved early. You want a banker involved early, and obviously you want a CPA to review those documents, and then do your due diligence. Okay. So thank you so much. That was my part, and at this time we're going to call Mr. Chambliss in. So I give the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. So I'm going to have a talk here that has a lot of parallels with what Dan just went through. But Dan looks at things in a far more analytical way than I do, at least on the outset. I think that certainly as we get into analyzing businesses, the analytical side, the details are very important. But I'd like to just leave you with some concepts this morning that you can refer to and get back to sort of what I was trying to say as you think about things going forward. So the first thing that I would suggest is that it's important that each of us thinks about buying a business. And the key reason is because ageism is alive and well in corporate America. Look around. If you're in corporate America now, look around and tell me how many people are in your company that are 62 years old or 60 years old. How many people are in your company that had a medical event more than a year ago? Corporate America is not a friend of its employees. There are two data points. One is if a man gets to be 65 years old, there's a 1 in 4 chance he'll live to be 98. If a woman gets to be 65 years old, there's a 1 in 4 chance she'll live to be 103. So if corporate America is ending at 62 or 65 years old, there's a long runway between not having a role in corporate America and being dead. And so it's important that you think about what you're going to do to maintain your lifestyle. One of the disadvantages about looking for a business to buy is that there is a distinct, there's a distinct imbalance right now in the market. There are radically more buyers than there are sellers in the market. And so almost by definition, all of the deals that you're going to see as you go out and look for deals to buy, almost all of them are going to have a lot of hair on them. It's just the nature of the beast. And so it's important that you figure out how to look behind that hair. And I reference Dan's comments on that. And I'll speak to it a little bit to begin with, or in my session. So let's stipulate that it's important that you buy a business. Then what to buy? I would say that the first thing to think about as you look at what to buy is to let go of what it is you think you should buy. Because again, given the businesses that are in the market, it's important to think about what it is you can do rather than what kind of business you should own. Think about what skill sets you've got. Think about what networks you've got. Think about what you really want to do with your life. So I would say that as you look at a business to buy, and you're looking, and I'll come back, actually, I'll go ahead and say it now. The best place to look for businesses to buy is on BizBuySell, BizBuySell.com, BizBuySell.com. It is the mothership of all listing services. Many large business brokerages have their own listing sites. But what I would say is that all of those big business brokerages also put their listings on BizBuySell. So it's a good place to go look. So as you look at a business on BizBuySell, I want you to ask yourself really 3 questions to begin with. The first is, what does a day in the life of the business owner look like 3 years after you've bought the business? You know, cash flow will make up for a lot of boredom. And so you can look at a business, for instance, let's take Brewster's Ice Cream. Owning 4 or 5 Brewster's ice cream shops may give you the kind of cash flow that you want, but will it give you the intellectual stimulation that you want? Do you want your employees to be carrying shovels or PCs? So think about what kind of intellectual stimulation you want. The second thing, as you look at a deal or look at an opportunity in BizBuySell, is to say, what do I think I could do to increase the cash flow of the business? Now, you're only going to see a small snippet in the BizBuySell write-up. But the first thing to think about is, what do I think I could do that would increase cash flow, right? Cash flow is the heart of a business. It is unbelievable how poor sales and marketing are in small businesses. Generally, a lot of small businesses start with someone who's working for a boss and grows disillusioned and says, you know, I can go across the street, take my skills, take my customers or a couple of my key customers, and I can go across the street and compete and get all of the money for myself. And so a lot of businesses start with a person and an idea and a couple of customers. Those customers beget other customers, and all of a sudden, 10 years into the business owner turns around and says, God, I've got a great book of business. But oftentimes, that great book of business came without a sales effort, without a marketing effort. And so the easiest way to think about increasing cash flow is to think about what you could do in terms of sales and marketing for the business that's specified that you're looking at on BizBuySell. The third thing to think about as you look at this snippet is to say, well, what do I think I could do to increase the value of the business before I sell it in 5 to 7 years? So there's really 2 tranches there. The first, the 5 to 7 years, I'm not suggesting that you sell your business in 5 to 7 years. I am suggesting that you're always thinking about when would be the right time to sell. The data show that the rate of growth of newly acquired businesses starts to drop off after 4 to 6 years. That's sort of intuitively obvious as to even the casual observer, as they would say at the North Avenue Trade School. Why does business drop off? Why does growth drop off in 4 to 6 years? Business buyers have their own bag of tricks. There's low-hanging fruit inside the business that they're buying. There are a lot of things that contribute to rapid growth after the acquisition. But after 4 or 6 years, the bloom is off the rose, the buyer is sort of settling into a groove, the bag of tricks is run out, and so the growth rate starts to tail off. It doesn't mean that that's the time to sell the business. What it does mean is that it's time to take a look at your business, take a look at the growth rate, take a look at the cash flow that you've got, and decide whether it makes more sense to cash out of that business and use the proceeds to invest in another business that will give you a stronger growth rate. Of course, many people decide to just continue and to harvest the cash out of the existing business. But what I'm emphasizing here is that you always want to be thinking about when is the right time to sell a business. And the data suggests if growth is important to one, that the right time to sell is around the 5-year mark. The other way of looking at businesses that are available to you is to think about these 3 words: scalable, replicable, and extensible. Let me explain what I mean about each of these 3. Scalable: what kind of growth does this business offer inside the 4 walls that you're buying? Is it operating at 60% capacity on one shift? Is it operating at 80% capacity on one shift? Is it using 2 shifts plus a stub for the weekend maintenance? What kind of capacity is there to grow it within its own 4 walls? Scalable. How can you scale the business without a lot of capital expenditure? Replicable. The easiest way to think about replicable, the easiest ways are these 2. The first is the idea. So let's take a bridal salon. How many bridal salons can a market sustain without there being oversubscription? You might have the right idea for a bridal salon, but it's hard to compete because there's so many competitors. But think about that idea in Macon or Chattanooga or Savannah. So can you take an idea, recognize that there's limited growth in its existing footprint, but know that you can replicate it in other places? Another example of replicable is this. We sold a landscaping company probably 5 years ago now. And we sold it to a family office. It was a large single location landscaping company. My client, the owner, stayed on after the acquisition, and his first job on day 1 of his new job was to go out and find other landscaping companies around Metro Atlanta that the family office could buy, because they wanted to grow across the region, but they didn't want their crews sitting in Atlanta rush hour traffic. And so their solution was to buy other smaller landscaping companies, a couple of them not so small, around the metro area in order to grow the idea, the backbone. So that's the replicable. The extensible, scalable, replicable, extensible. The extensible is this. Think about a medical supply distribution company, a medical supply sales company that sells disposables, consumables. So the company will have customers in hospitals and physicians' clinics and old folks' homes. The buyers that are buying their sheets and sharps and latex gloves also buy medical devices. So if you're looking at a medical consumables company and you know where you can get a license to sell a medical device, then that's a great way of thinking about growing your business. Because the problem with sales, the challenge in sales is not selling something to someone. It's finding the right someone to sell it to. So if you're already buying a network of buyers, then think about the other products you can put into that distribution channel and have buyers already built in. And the nice thing about this is that the gross margin of the products that are sold drop to EBITDA, because the SG&A is already consumed with the existing sales channel. So you get an outsized bump to the cash flow that's coming out of the business. So that's the why buy, what to buy. Again, on what to buy, let me emphasize opportunism. Go out and look for businesses. And what I would sincerely encourage you to do is to sit down with BizBuySell in an evening, or for some of us at noontime, and have a glass of wine or an adult beverage, relax, and just fantasize as you walk through BizBuySell about what it would be like to own that particular business. Maybe set some filters up that define the size that you want to buy, but don't define industry or and don't define geography. While you may want a business in Atlanta, think about being able to drive to Macon and work from there. Think about how easy it is to manage a business virtually. So Dan spent some time talking about how businesses are valued. I would like to suggest an alternative or an additional way to value business. I would suggest that enterprise value is equal to, it has in it only two variables. One is cash flow, one is risk, where the risk is defined as the sustainability of the cash flow. What is it? What is the probability that the cash flow in the 2 years after the business is acquired will be equal to or greater than the cash flow in the 2 years before the business is acquired? So think about enterprise value equals cash flow divided by risk. Higher enterprise value, higher cash flow, higher enterprise value. Higher risk, lower enterprise value, because it's in the denominator, right? So cash flow divided by risk. What do I mean by sustainability of the cash flow? Well, is there customer concentration? If one customer is 30% of the revenues of the business, or even worse, 30% of the EBITDA of the business, then if that customer goes away because they don't like the way the owner parts his hair, then all of a sudden you've got a really severe hit to the business. So customer concentration is an example of threats to the sustainability of the cash flow. If the key managers don't have employment agreements that will assure that they will stay with the business after the acquisition, or at least won't go across the street and compete with it or solicit its customers or employees, then if there are no such employment agreements, then there's a lot of risk. Think back about what I said about the origination of a lot of small businesses. It's a person who says, I can go across the street and do this just as easily. How about all of the decisions going through the business owner? What happens if the business owner gets hit by a bus? Can one easily step in and pick up the business after she's dead? So think about the sustainability of the cash flow. Dan talked a lot about going through and assessing a business. So that is part of what I'd like to talk to you about in terms of the process of buying a business. I would suggest that the first thing is to go out and to search for businesses and to have some loose guidelines around how you're going to choose a business for an assessment. I think that the first thing that we're going to do is to look at the business in terms of passion. What do you think you'd like? How do you think you'd like running and owning that business? How would it fit in with your self-image, with your identity? Now, one thing's for sure, your self-image is going to have to shift from your ability to stand in a cocktail party right now and say, oh, I am the director of sales for a Fortune 100 business, or I am the chief financial officer of a division of a Fortune 100 business. Going from that to saying I'm the owner of an HVAC company, there's a different image, that's a different self-image that's needed. And so it's part of your discernment process to make sure that not only would you have a passion for that business, but also that you would be comfortable with identifying yourself as the owner of such a business. So find a business, assess it. Cash flow is king. The sustainability of the cash flow, those are two different ways to think in general terms about the value of a business in your assessment process. You want to then make an offer for the business that you like. After you've asked questions, after you've looked at the business, you've seen the confidential information memorandum, CIM, or at Abraxas, we call them confidential business profiles, but they're the business owner's document to you that says, this is what my business is. So you analyze it, you ask the questions, you meet the owners either on Zoom or preferably, highly preferably, in person. You want to walk around and kick the tires. So you decide that this is a business you want to buy, you make an offer. Offers go in the form of either a letter of intent or a term sheet. Those are the same concepts, different formats. A letter of intent is, as it says, a letter, so it's in paragraph form. A term sheet is an outline. In either case, it's very important that your offer cover all of the business aspects of the acquisition and specify it. Let's say that you are buying cash flow, or that you're valuing the business based on cash flow. Then you want to specify in the offer that the business valuation is predicated on some cash flow number times some multiple, and look at it from that perspective. Let me put a bookmark in the process and go back to something that Dan spoke to in terms of multiples. If I'm asked what the value of a business is, I think I can't go too far wrong by saying that it's worth 3 to 3.25 times adjusted EBITDA plus the balance sheet. So what I mean by that is that I'm offering 3.25, or that the business is valued at 3.25 times adjusted EBITDA, which is cash flow from operations. It has all of the owner's compensation, benefits, perquisites added back in, plus the balance sheet, accounts receivable, think current accounts here. Zero cash, zero debt, but it's accounts receivable plus inventory less accounts payable, no long-term liability. So valuations can be looked at as 3.25 times adjusted EBITDA plus the current accounts. Well, different businesses have different multiples, and it goes back to the sustainability of the cash flow. A manufacturing company is going to have a 4.5, 4.25 times adjusted EBITDA plus balance sheet valuation. A professional services business might have a 2 times adjusted EBITDA plus current accounts valuation. Why would that be? Well, think about a manufacturing company. When a customer of a manufacturing company buys a widget, they're buying the widget based on the attributes of the widget. They really don't care who owns the machinery. So if the machinery ownership changes, they're really not caring about the ownership as long as the attributes of the widget stay. On the professional services side, think about a psychiatrist. If a psychiatrist sells his practice to another psychiatrist, what is the probability that the patients of the selling psychiatrist will go to the buying psychiatrist? Pretty low, because as Dan pointed out in terms of the salon, a lot of times customers follow the person, not the business. So in your offer, make sure that you specify the valuation and how you got to the valuation, so that if there are any hiccups in that 90 days between the offer and the closing table, then it's already accommodated in the term sheet or the offer. So there is a price that we're going to put in the offer, but we're also going to specify the consideration. How are we going to pay for that business? Think about a stack, on a consideration stack that includes cash at closing, a seller note. A seller note is the difference between, it's designed to make up for the difference between the buyer and the seller's valuation of the business and the banker's valuation of the business. Bankers are inherently more conservative than business owners and business buyers. And so a seller note takes accounts for the difference between what the buyer and the seller think it's worth and what the bank is willing to lend against. So we're going to specify that in our consideration. Maybe there is growth, or maybe there are risks that you want to mitigate. You want to pay the business seller for his history. The seller is trying to sell you futures, right? So sellers are selling the future, buyers are buying the past. But the seller, if the seller has a lot of sustained growth, then they're not going to want to sell for historical numbers. They're going to want to get the benefit of that growth. You as the buyer want to mitigate your risk. So think about a contingent portion of the consideration that says, if the business continues to grow at the 15% it's been growing, then in a year, you're going to pay that extra 15% after the growth is sustained. Or if there is a key customer that's important that to the success of the business, then you're going to want to say, I will pay another amount when I get to, when that customer is still with me after a year. So as you go through the offer, again, make sure that you cover all of the elements of business risk that you want to cover. I'm buying $1 million of accounts receivable. I want to make sure that 60 days after the close that I've been able to collect that $1 million of accounts receivable. And if I haven't, then I want to make sure I've got a mechanism for making it right. So the offer is incredibly important. The other piece that is there as you think about the process is to think about the due diligence. Due diligence is your effort to make sure the business is as it was offered to you. And so you're going to want to have a team around you that will both help you with the legal documents. So you need an attorney that has access to all of the kinds of law you need. You're going to want a due diligence team that is going to help you with scrubbing the books. Think about a financial auditor. So you're going to want an accounting firm to help you look at the books. You're going to want the attorney that's negotiating the closing documents to help you make sure the business is as it was presented, in terms of ownership, no liabilities, no liens, no encumbrances. And you're going to want to have an SBA banker, most likely, to help you finance the deal. The SBA loan program is something you absolutely want to pay attention to. So there is a process for selling a business. Identify it, assess it, make a great offer that eliminates questions, and then work at that 90 days from the offer to the closing table, where you've got the right lender, the right attorneys who are deal makers, not deal blower ups. And you're going to want to make sure you've got the right financial team. The documentation that Carol will send around after this presentation will have these ideas on paper, and it'll also have my contact information. I'm thrilled to have been given the opportunity to talk. I'm certainly available for questions, both at the end of the session and as you have them going forward. So with that, sorry to have run over a few minutes, Leslie. I'll hand it over to the best franchise consultant in the cosmos, and we're fortunate to have her both in Atlanta and on this call.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a few slides. Dave or Daniel or Carol, can you confirm that you're seeing my slides as full screen?
Yes, ma'am. They're up.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. And good morning, everybody. My name is Leslie Cuban, and I'm going to spend a few minutes saying some general things about exploring franchising, franchise opportunities in general. And I'm also going to speak to franchise acquisitions, buying a franchise business that is a going concern. There are some things that are similar to what Dave and Daniel have already said about buying an existing business. And there's things that are different, definitely different with regards to buying an up and running franchise. And here's a QR code that just lets me know that you'd like to stay in touch with me. I send out opportunity alerts. I'm involved in different education events, and that will give you an opportunity to let me know if you'd like me to invite you to those in the future. So just a few things on, there's different ways to own a business, different forms of entrepreneurship. Franchising is just one of them. Why consider franchising? What are the benefits of it? I'll say a couple things about that. But first, I want to say the number one reason why people looking at entrepreneurial opportunities don't consider franchising, that I hear all the time, is because there's a widespread assumption that if we're talking about franchising, that we're talking about food. We're talking about food service. We're talking about restaurants. The reality is there's about 3,800, approaching 4,000 franchise opportunities to choose from in North America. And about half of them are food or restaurant service related, which means the other half is not. And that's really where my experience as a franchise owner has been, as a consultant, has been on service industry franchising. And I'll say more about that. I'll give examples a little later in the presentation. But why people turn to franchising for an entrepreneurial opportunity, there's really a couple of common reasons for it. The way I can sum it all up is risk reduction, in the sense that when you start to dig into successful franchise offerings, there may be millions of dollars already invested in the systems. The model has proven to work in different locales and different situations. So bottom line is it can be a way to get into an entrepreneurial opportunity, particularly a person's first entrepreneurial opportunity, with some more stability and with some more predictability around it. And there's a trade-off for that. If you own a franchise, there's going to be a day, a time at some point in your ownership of that franchise where you are going to have to comply with something that you may not like. That has certainly been true for me. So people who are a good fit for franchising entrepreneurship, they see greater value in having systems and having a proven model, having other franchise owners to collaborate with. They see that as the greater value than having 100% control, because you don't. Those systems and protocols that the franchise offer are guardrails to help people start and grow a business, with benchmarks on how to run that business along the way, key performance indicators. But they're also, they're guardrails to help people learn this new business and not fall off the ledge as they make mistakes and course correct. But it's also controls that franchisors have in place. So that is a question that anybody looking at different kinds of entrepreneurial opportunities, franchising included, is going to have to answer for themselves. But also, people who turn to franchising are those who raise their hand and say, I've got a good business mind. I think I can run a business. I've been doing that for somebody else, and now I would like to do it for myself, but I don't have my own idea, my own passion to go out and start a business, or I can't find a good business to buy that makes sense for me. So I'm in a particular kind of industry. So I talk to a lot of people who've been looking at independent existing businesses to buy, and they're just not finding something that suits their needs. So they open their minds to other kinds of opportunities that they may not have thought of before, leading them to look at different kinds of franchise opportunities. One thing that's unique to franchising, there are some unique and advantageous avenues to conducting due diligence. The first is that franchising is the only form of business opportunity that is regulated by the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, in the way that there is a lot of information about the franchise offering and the performance of the franchise offering that has to be disclosed to any and all potential franchise buyers. So every franchise out there has to create what's called a franchise disclosure document. FDD is what we call it for short. It's a book. It's about 30, it can be probably 150 pages on the small side, up to hundreds of pages for large global franchise systems. And they follow the same format. So if you're looking at 5 or 6 different franchises, you're going to get the same format of a document from all of them. And that is legally required. I or you as a potential franchisee have to have this document in hand for at least 14 days prior to any kind of a contractual commitment. And it outlines the obligations of all the parties. Many franchises have a protected or semi-protected geographic territory, and how that is calculated is defined. There are often financial performance representations of how the franchise system units or sampling of the franchise system units have been performing financially thus far. I will tell you right now, this document is never going to tell you what your income is going to be, what your return on investment, what your performance is going to be. It will give you some data to start asking questions around that. But what you will find performance-wise in any franchise system is there is a bell curve of success. A third of the franchisees are knocking the cover off the ball, are rock stars and very successful. There's folks in the middle who are just not as aggressive, but they're usually happy with the results that they're achieving. And then there's a third who are struggling and still trying to figure it out. So the performance representations are never going to, they're rarely, I should say, going to be fully representative of that. So I encourage people to use it as data points and asking a lot of questions across the franchise system. So there's samples of all of the contracts, the fees, the costs of the business are all broken down in this document. But I think the most valuable part of it is the third point here, the listing and contact information for all of the franchise owners already in the system. And there's no crystal ball in any of this, but this is what I have found to be the closest thing to it, is the ability, encouragement, and requirement to go out and talk to the franchise owners who have already become franchisees of this system. And they will tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. They don't hold back by and large. And it's a great place to really understand what is required to be successful and what success can look like within that particular business model. What kind of skills do the successful franchisees have? Is that something you feel you have or feel you can learn? What kind of money does it take? How would they rate the training that they have paid for? You pay a variety of fees and training costs to the franchisor, and that's something that you want to get a feel for value around, and franchisees will talk very openly about that. What are the earnings potential of the business? Would you do this again? If you could go back to day one in owning this franchise, what would you do differently? So there's a lot of wonderful learning to be had here that can really help people if they're doing this right, they're taking this seriously, they're asking the right questions, can get a fairly predictable picture of what their ownership experience is going to be for that type of business. I think this is the most important bit that I have to share. If I'm trying to summarize the value of franchising, it's right here in this very wordy and boring slide. It's not necessarily in the brand. One part of the brand underneath the brand is all the various protocols and systems, and the special sauce is here. It is in all of the things that the franchisor may have already invested millions of dollars into that makes the business model work. Dave talked earlier about how pitiful sales and marketing looks in most small businesses and in small businesses for sale. That can be one of the greatest strengths of a good franchise system, is they have already invested in and they understand and they continue to invest in the customer acquisition strategies that work, so that customers are walking into the door of the franchisee's business quickly and in an expected, anticipated way. If there's real estate involved, knowing how to negotiate with landlords and how to keep construction expenses in line, there's a lot of money that can be left on the table when people don't know how to do that. So that alone can offset the franchise fees that are paid. There's competitive intelligence, there's investment in technology. With many of these franchise systems, owners are able to see what's happening in their business in real time, run their business from their phone or their tablet. There may be national accounts already in place, business-to-business national accounts, if that's appropriate for the business, that can drive business right away into a franchisee's business. So, and you pay for this. There's various fees. There's upfront franchise fees. There's ongoing fees. And, that can be a little off-putting at first, but I think, and the value is there in some franchise systems, and in others it's not. And I'll be the first one to admit that not all franchises are equal. And that is a very fair and important question to be asking in due diligence, is what are the fees and what is one getting in return for them initially and ongoing for the fees that are going to continue to be paid. But I do contend, I never understood it. Like when you look at what the value can be in a good franchise system compared to what the franchise fees are, that you have access to for the term of the franchise agreement, that you yourself don't have to spend the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on creating yourself. I've always scratched my head why people challenge that. It is a fair question to ask, but when it works so well. And another point I would offer is, if one is looking to buy or start an independent operation, and there are very strong franchise systems already out there delivering this to their franchisees, it's what you are competing against as an independent operator. So, and I said this earlier, that one of the main attractions to franchising entrepreneurship is the ability to do something new. And most people that I'm helping through this exploration journey, they often have a yearning to do something new and different. They have skill sets, but they've worked in IT, or they've worked in HR, or they've been a corporate executive for many, many years, and they want to spread their wings and do something new, but they just don't have the risk appetite to try to do that completely on their own. Or to try to figure it out on the way, which is why when you look at most people who find their way into ownership of a franchise operation, they're usually choosing something very different than whatever they've done before. And because of those systems, because of the proven business model that is already in place, people are able to gain a comfort that they can learn this new business with reasonable risk in a reasonable period of time. So, and here's just a few examples. And what I spoke about regarding service industries before, what I would give you broad categories that I would give you are business services. There are hundreds of opportunities catering to the needs of other small, medium, and large size businesses that are part of successful franchise brands. Home services has always been a good mainstay in franchising, all kinds of home improvement or home maintenance types of services that are successful in franchising. Healthcare, education, consumer services of a variety of kind, which could be pet care or wellness or fitness or beauty, service related types of businesses, which is where franchising really thrives. And if you'll notice, I didn't list anything there that was rocket science. Anything that is succeeding in franchising is in a very competitive industry but where franchising wins is in these high known demand types of service industries. And the winners bring a more successful mousetrap to the table that allow franchisees to carve out their piece of the pie to achieve their goals, again, with minimal risk and some of these competitive advantages that these systems can bring with successful franchise companies. And I have some examples. I'm going to kind of get into franchise acquisitions here, but I've got some things I can share with you. This was a gentleman I interviewed. He was a hospitality executive, acquired a existing franchise in the paint contracting industry. And within a year or two, he went from becoming a brand new owner to being either the number 1 or number 2 franchisees in this nationwide franchise system. And it was because there were already customers, there was already a pipeline of business in place, but he was just able to improve that very quickly. So I'd be happy to send you a link to this interview. Earlier this year, I helped someone acquire a up and running home care agency franchise, and he had acquired another franchise before this acquisition. And I have an interview with him as well, and I would be happy to share that with you. Just to give you some perspective, some advice on what it means to buy an up and running existing franchise. So these are some resources that I can offer beyond myself. And, there's so many choices that are out there. This is my work, is helping people understand where their fit could be in the ocean of different service franchise opportunities. There's brand new brands coming to market. There are brands that have been around for 50 years. Some are business services. Some are a hybrid of business and consumer services. Some are very owner-operator organized. Others are more, I'm going to use the word semi-passively managed. None of these are passive or absentee. I hate that when there's any suggestion that it is, but there are opportunities where one can continue in their current business or their current job if they have some help and if they have some flexibility in their schedule. Some of these franchises are not intended to be owner-operator, and the franchise isn't looking for that. So there's all these choices, and this is my business, helping people navigate this and figure it out. And to answer the question, is franchising entrepreneurship right for you? And the answer is about 25% of the time, yes. I help about 75% of the people that I speak with realize that it is not the right fit or that it is not the right time. So let's talk a little bit about franchise acquisitions and how they are different. And I do want to underscore something that Dave also said earlier about filters and kind of letting go of some of your preconceived notions about what that business that you're going to buy is going to be. And a big one is geographic preference. And I will tell you, if you want to buy a strong cash flowing business and it's a good business to buy, it's the right business for you, the deal is right, and it's a 10-minute drive from your home, that is the unicorn of unicorns. And I would not have the expectation that that is realistic. So when if a really important criteria point is that it does need to be in a reasonable distance from where I live, I'm not willing to relocate and I'm not willing to commute, you're going to have to give up and make some trade-offs on some of the other things that you would like to find in a business. I just see that over and over again, whether it's a franchise or not a franchise, when people are looking to buy a going concern. So with a franchise, it's not just the buyer and the seller. The franchisor is someone who has say-so in this. And in most cases, the franchisor has language in the franchise agreements that they always reserve the right to approve the buyer of the business. And that is especially important to them when the seller is a very successful franchisee. They want to make sure that whoever buys it has the skills and the money to continue the success and grow that success of that royalty revenue stream for them. So just because you want your son or your daughter to take over your very successful business doesn't mean the franchisor is going to agree. They want to make sure that whoever is taking it over is appropriate for their needs and goals as a franchisor. So be aware of that. A very positive point is the franchisor always reserves the right to train the buyer. So if you're buying an up and running franchise, you're not just getting, a week or two with the seller of the business. You're going through the full gamut of franchise training that any franchisee is going to have. And so oftentimes you're getting double training from the franchisor and some transition assistance from the selling franchisee. The franchisor may help facilitate this transaction. With the larger franchise systems, they may have a whole track for franchise resales that just helps smooth out the overall process, that just makes it a better experience for the buyer and the seller. Some franchises have nothing to do with it, and that is a good question to ask, particularly if you want to work with a brand that is really going to help you maximize your investment. You want to, when you sell your franchise, you want to, ask questions around, do they have some kind of a resale process in place already? They may be easily help you fix it. As Dave mentioned, there's probably going to be hair on this business that you're going to buy, franchise or not. But they may have a clear and quick understanding of what a new owner needs to do to quickly fix the business or grow the business. And because of these systems in place, it can make the due diligence and selection process a bit shorter. I'd say about 1 in 6 or 7 of the businesses I help people with are a franchise resale. And it's on average from the time that we start the conversations around all of this to the time where someone has found a business to buy is within about 5 months, which is, relative to most search timelines, relatively quick. And the franchisor may already have financing relationships in place, specific banks, where you still have to be a qualified buyer and the bank still has to like the deal, but having an existing relationship in place for financing can be beneficial. So I already spoke to this, that this is what I help people do. And I help people gauge, if this is something that they should be looking at now or not. And again, here's my QR code and my contact information. So do feel free to connect with me, stay in touch with me. I'm very active on LinkedIn every day. So I do feel free to connect with me there. Daniel, I'll turn it back to you. That's what I had planned.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Leslie and Dave. So we do have questions. So I will tee them up for everybody, and then we'll just all chirp in whenever it's applicable. Let me start with how do you buy an investment and not buy a job? This is from Keith. How to be the owner, not just another employee. Anybody? Okay. Well, obviously, and Leslie mentioned this, and Dave, I'm sure, brought it up. There are businesses that are more of a passive ownership. I've got a couple of RV storage parks right now, and pretty much it's just the guy buys the dirt, and pays it, and puts a gate on it and a monitoring system, and set to go. So those are some of the passive type businesses out there. He's got a full-time job, or they've got a full-time job. So there are some passive opportunities. You just realize, though, 90% of the cases are going to be, you're going to be running a business. So that's what you're doing. So you guys got anything?
I'd say in terms of the passive part, there are a lot of businesses out there that will allow you to be passive. A lot of times, like the RV park, it's really just a way of paying mortgages. And so you're looking at the increasing value of the underlying real estate and thinking about what the increase in value is going to be in 5 or 7 years or 10 years between what you sell it now. Passive generally means something that doesn't require a lot of intellectual consideration. It is something that's just going to increase in value without any assistance from the owner.
And I would add to that, of course, it's the franchising filter here. Many businesses, as they are scaled and good teams are groomed and put in place, an owner can be less and less hands-on. But in the early part of the business, whether it's an acquisition or buying new franchise licenses, the franchisee needs to have some level of involvement. That doesn't mean being behind the counter of it all day, every day, but there is a time commitment required to make sure that business is continuing the success or growing the way it needs to grow from the beginning.
Exactly.
To that point too, there's an issue of scale. We're representing a family office right now that's looking to make acquisitions, and the head of the family office is not interested in being a day-to-day worker bee. Wants to be involved in the strategy and in employing the networks that the family office has, but doesn't want to be actively involved. And so it means that we've got to buy a business that will have the capacity to have a very qualified general manager and still spit off the kinds of cash flow that makes the investment worthwhile.
Exactly. Terrific. Tom asked, what do you do if a seller is demanding a very high price due to supposed value of IP? I guess that's intellectual property. How does a buyer get arms around that?
That's a really tough question. And the answer is that's the heart of the assessment. Sometimes the IP is directly related to cash flow, and that makes it much easier to evaluate. But more often, IP is just know-how and licenses and patents that they have that are contributing to the cash flow. But the assessment of the IP is really a tough one to get your arms around.
And we see that quite a bit, and IP is only as good as it is long. So intellectual properties, if China picks it up, you'll have a copy in a couple of months. So those can go away rather quickly. So you realize that. John asked about a specific example on how to calculate cap rate. And there is one in the slide presentation that you'll be getting a copy of, so that we don't have to, we only got about 4 or 5 minutes left to answer questions. So you'll get that. And of course, John, you're one of my clients, so I can talk to you about it as well. With regards to appraisals, what would be your comment to someone who is worried that the seller wants 1.8, but the bank says 1.2, and we've now wasted 4 months and X amount of dollars? Dave mentioned a seller note for the difference. I will tell you, being a former lender, if the business is valued at XYZ, we're not going to give you more money than XYZ. Probably won't give you a full XYZ. We'll give you a percentage of that. So, it's up to you to come up with a difference. You can do that, but the truth is, and a second thing you can do is also order a different appraisal. We've seen that happen as well, and to the tune of $2 million not too long ago. So either one of y'all got anything on that one?
The thing that I would suggest here is that the business value needs to be in the mind of the business buyer. So if the business seller says it's worth 1.8 and the business buyer and the business lender, the bank, says it's worth 1.2, don't be put off by that, but to think about it as a starting place for you. You can grow that $1.8 million business to being $3 million over 2 years. You just know it. It's all about risk, and you got to first and foremost believe in yourself. And so if you see a business and you think it's worth 1.8, the bank says it's worth 1.2, then think about how you bridge that gap, not walk away.
Good point. I did not hear you mention it was okay to hire a consultant. Why would you, man? We don't charge. But sure, go for it, Brian. Get those dollars. Sometime I'll tell you my funny story on consultants. So,
but you are happy to charge if he wants to.
Yeah, I can set up an LLC real quick. So, John, again, can you confirm SDE distributions are added back into the fold? Typically, that is considered a distribution is based on the revenue. So, Dave, you're shaking your head. What do you think?
So the add back of a distribution is only made if the distribution shows in the income statement.
Right.
So not to be too technical, but a distribution is a distribution of retained earnings. And so it is a balance sheet effort. If it's a distribution in quote marks in the income statement, then it is really compensation. If it's compensation, then excess compensation gets added back. And when I say excess compensation, it is the compensation that, so an owner pays herself one amount, she could go out and hire someone to do what she's doing for some amount that's less. We're only going to add back the difference between what she's paying herself and what it would cost to hire a general manager.
And again, as a former lender, we didn't accept those typically anyway, because the new owner is going to be getting a salary / those distributions. So one is going out, but another one's coming in. Leslie, anything? Okay. What happens when a seller is adamant about adding back salary, but the bank says no? Well, I'll tell you right now, the bank's lending the money. So bank says no, that's it. You can't, you go to a different lender.
Yeah.
So.
The golden rule applies. He with the gold rules.
Rules. This is true. And the bank doesn't really care about happiness. I'll be honest with you there too. All right, where did you get the multiple from in the calculation of the SDE? The 2020, I've got the old version because Drew has the new one. This is what it looks like. This is the business reference guide. So that's where I get my multiples.
It's a really good publication.
Yeah.
But one thing, if I might
Sure.
add to this. So the valuations, the multiples that one finds in the data, think about that as the midpoint of a bell curve. And it is a data-driven number that says out of all of these transactions that this is the midpoint or the average or however it's calculated. But as you look at a business, and let's say that the business reference guide says it's worth 3.5, but if you look at it and you think that it's got a lot of value in it that's not reflected in other businesses like that, then be willing to pay more than the number that's there. Or if you're seeing a business that has weaknesses that you don't think other businesses like that has, then consider that. But look, the weaknesses in a business can be low-hanging fruit for you, the buyer. If you know that you can fix those issues in the business, regardless of the multiple, then it's worth more to you.
All right. John wants to know top 5 books you'd recommend for someone looking to buy or sell. Here is, if we can get it, Biz Buy Sell has, this is a guide to selling your business. They also have one, Guide to Buying a Business. There's several out there. I haven't read 5 books since I got my last certification. So
I thought you were going to say since you graduated high school.
Probably back then college. All right. Leslie, you're on mute.
I'll throw in my favorite book about franchising is called The Wealthy Franchisee by Scott Greenberg. It's a fairly new publication. It references the pandemic, but he just really hits the bullseye on why some franchisees are very successful rock stars and others scratch their head and try to figure it out.
Good deal. Okay. When you're looking to buy a business, do you need to create an LLC first, or do you buy the existing LLC with the business you are buying? One thing to keep in mind, LLCs are only good for 30 years. So if that LLC's been out there for 15 or 20 years and you're buying it, you're going to have to do something in 10 years because it'll expire. But Dave?
Let me take a different approach at that. So there are 2 ways to acquire a business. One is through a purchase of the assets. One is through a purchase of the shares or the ownership. I'd say 90% of the deals that we at Abraxas do, and we're aimed at 5 to 30 in revenue, 5 million to 30 million in terms of revenues for our sell side clients. In our space, probably 85 or 90% of the deals are asset deals. The key difference is that when you're buying the shares, you're buying the history of the company. So if you're looking at a retaining wall company, you're not going to want to buy the shares because you're buying every retaining wall that that company's ever put up, as opposed to the equipment that is used, so that you're only responsible for the retaining walls you go forward. There are other reasons why you'd want to buy shares, or there are reasons why you'd want to buy shares instead of assets, like transfer of customer relationships or access to GSA schedules. But you're really buying the assets. And so you're going to want to have your own legal entity into which to take those assets. And that suggests that you want to have a conversation with your accountant and your attorney to talk, and your financial planner, to talk about which structure works best for you. You want to flow through, which means it's either a partnership, an LLC, or a subchapter S corporation. But generally speaking, when we talk about buying an LLC, it's for reasons outside of why you just buy the assets.
When acquiring a business with employees, what can you do pre-closing to best prepare for a smooth transition? And any suggestions on how to present yourself post-closing to your new team? I have found that earlier you're introduced as the new owner or potential new owner, the better. Quite often that's a problem with the seller, because the seller doesn't want the employees to know that they're about to be sold, or their positions might go away or whatever. But definitely before you close, all right? And also, Dave mentioned earlier, get a commitment in writing that they plan to stay on.
An employment agreement,
An
absolutely.
employment agreement.
And as you, the buyer, you really flip over into being a seller in terms of selling yourself and selling your vision. So that's not a trivial question at all. I think that a buyer of a business should present a very compelling discussion for why the employees and the company are going to thrive under the new ownership. Exactly. Without denigrating the owner, but just about where we're going to go in the future.
All right. Planning to buy a construction company, do you recommend to have the former owner as partner? No. So, why? Unless you don't know how to run the business, you might want him to stay on for a little while, but I've run into those scenarios, and there is some SBA guidelines when it comes to the prior owner staying on board as well. They're only a limited time. So y'all agree with me?
Yeah. The worst position, the worst investment that one can have is a minority ownership of a small business. It is illiquid. And so the minority owner doesn't want it, and the majority owner doesn't want it because it's like having dogs yipping at your ankles in terms of distributions and direction. So I would say that you don't want a partner, but you do want the owner to be involved as long as practical in terms of the transition.
Yeah, now there are situations where it was maybe a veteran-owned business or a minority-owned business that they have contracts based on that certification. But in that scenario, those owners have to stay on as a 51%. So they would be majority, not minority, and then And
so they can't get an SBA loan. The other thing about the set-asides, whether it's disadvantaged DBEs, disadvantaged business enterprises, it's that the buyer needs to see how much of the revenues went to that company because of the certification or the set-aside, and how much of those revenues will be available without the certification going forward.
Those ongoing revenue expectations. How do you value a startup? I value it by the amount of money that the startup person has put in. That's the only way you can, because you don't have any sales.
on that, Dan, I would say, what do you think you can do with the business?
Right, yeah,
Right,
if it's,
in going forward. But valuing startups is extremely hard because part of the difference between a franchise and buying an existing business is that with the, in both cases, the franchise and the existing business, they've already started to think about taking some of the startup risk out of the equation.
okay, terrific. And that's all the questions in the Q&A. I think we
Perfect
probably
timing.
answered Mike's question on the stock purchase. I hope we did. And we're already almost 10 minutes over. Dave, thank you so much. Leslie, as always, thank you as well. All of the participants, we appreciate you greatly. This has been recorded. You'll get copies of the slides sometime within the next 4 or 5 days. Any questions? You've got my contact information, Dave's contact information, and Leslie's. Have a great day. Go out and buy a business. Call me. Bye-bye now.